Everyone here today. My name is Tina Gabrielson. I'm a professor of political science at the University of Wyoming. I teach primarily in political philosophy. I've served twice as a state We the People judge, and this is my first time at the national level. It's been fun so far, and I'm looking forward to your presentation today.
Greetings, everybody. My name is Barry Anderson. I'm an Associate Justice on the Minnesota Supreme Court. Thrilled to be a part of your day today. I really admire the work that the students have done and your willingness to try something new and different, and we will work our way through any little glitches that might pop up. I serve, I'm the Senior Justice on the Minnesota Supreme Court. My background with this program is that I helped a team as an assistant coach very early in the years of the program. And then for much of the last 2 decades, I've had the privilege of serving as a judge. And each year I learn something, and I'm delighted to be here. Tandy, floor is yours.
Great. Hi, my name is Tandy McConnell. For about 20 years, I was a professor of history at Columbia College in South Carolina. About 3 years ago, I wanted to do something that was harder, so I became a 8th grade teacher in Orangeburg, South Carolina. And if any of you remember being in the 8th grade is hard. That's a tough crowd, isn't it? But I also, I'll be asking your question in a few minutes, but we wanted to hear from you and find out who you are and who your teachers are. Would you introduce yourselves, please?
Good afternoon. We are Foothill High School's Unit 1, representing the state of California. My name is Kiera Moniz.
My name is Ian Valderrama.
My name is Lindsay Wang.
My name is Zoe Whelan.
And my name is Annie Liu. We'd like to thank the judges, the audience, and the timekeeper for being here today, as well as introduce our coaches, Mr. Dedamore and Mr. McBride.
Well, it is just a wonderful honor to be here with all of you. What time is it there in California?
It's about
10:30 a.m.
30. It's like 1:30 here, so we're living in different time zones even. But we're your Unit 1 judges. We're interested in the philosophical and historical foundations of the American political system, and we're asking question 3. Aristotle asserts in The Politics that it is not the form of government ruled by the one, the few, or the many that matters most, but rather the ends of government that are most important. Where in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution did the framers set forth the ends of government? How did the framers differ, if at all, about how the ends of government should be prioritized? Which of the ends of government set forth in the Declaration and Constitution appear to have the highest priority today? If you're ready, please begin.
In Politics, Book 3, Aristotle asserts that the end of the state is the good life. To manifest this good life, the founders wrote many ends into our founding documents. The Declaration of Independence embodied more natural rights ends, while the Constitution mirrored more classical Republican ends of what the good life truly means.
The Declaration of Independence set forth natural rights ends like the inalienable rights of life and liberty. These ends were not met under British rule because the people's will was suppressed by the government. The list of grievances demonstrated how the colonists believed Britain was infringing upon fundamental rights like those of representation, fair trials by jury, and independent government.
The Constitution was written to establish a government that protected the natural rights in the Declaration. To do so, classical Republican ideals of security and order must be ensured. The preamble's ends of ensuring domestic tranquility, providing for the common defense, and promoting the general welfare would serve to create a secure environment for individuals to pursue their personal goals.
Ultimately, the more natural rights ends listed in the Declaration of Independence and the more classical Republican ends expressed in the Constitution funnel into a single ultimate end of government as a manifestation of the good life, the pursuit of happiness.
However, while the framers all viewed the ideal of the pursuit of happiness as the end of government, they differed in their beliefs in the best way to achieve this end. To the Federalists, the pursuit of happiness was best achieved by a strong central government that provides stability. In the fifth vice of vices of the political system, James Madison denounces the Articles of Confederation for affording states too much liberty. Since states had too much liberty, they did not help each other even when it would benefit them all. A strong central government would provide stability and satisfy the common good by ensuring that states first performed tasks that benefited the nation before pursuing more localized ends.
Contrastingly, the Anti-Federalists believed that the pursuit of happiness was best achieved through strong state governments to protect individual liberty because local governments would have a better understanding of their people. In the first Brutus essay, Robert Yates argues that Congress should not have the power to determine the nation's general welfare, as stated in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. Instead, states, as smaller units, should determine the general welfare of their own residents. Accompanied by a Bill of Rights, states will best ensure and protect the people's freedom to pursue their own interests.
Today, the unprecedented conditions of a global pandemic have shifted the American focus from pursuing happiness to the protection and advancement of individual rights, to promoting the general welfare through protecting our health so as to preserve our future ability to pursue happiness.
This shift is most prevalent in the heightened restrictions on individual actions. Currently, 42 states have issued statewide shelter-in-place orders, limiting residents to only essential outside activity. Schools, stores, and restaurants across the nation have shut down, and certain states like California have canceled public gatherings of any size.
The unprecedented restrictions on movement that we see today are a sign of the shift in the government's ends. Do shelter-in-place orders violate our right to the free exercise of religion if we can't go to church? What about our right to assembly if public gatherings are banned, or our right to a speedy trial by jury if courts are closed?
The protection of our individual rights, once tantamount to the end of ensuring our right to pursue happiness, has been set aside in favor of public health and the common good. Once again, the government finds itself striking the delicate balance between order and liberty in response to the historical context, in the hopes of realizing that ultimate end of the pursuit of happiness. Thank you.
And thank you very much. An absolutely stirring presentation. But we have a few questions. I want to continue the conversation, perhaps challenge you in a few ideas. You make some really strong points about individual rights. I want to ask you the question, is there such a thing as community rights? We think about groups, people united, people who are brought together by politics or by religion or by an ethnic identity. So we could think of Navajo rights or Presbyterian rights or Mormon rights as a community. Do such groups have rights that, or are such rights simply brought, do they count more or less than individual rights?
I would argue that for particular groups or historically disenfranchised or oppressed groups do have more rights in that community. We can look to the levels of scrutiny in the judicial system and how the stricter systems or the stricter levels are intentionally put in place to protect people such as African Americans, such as women who have historically been oppressed.
And I think that this idea of group rights also extends largely to a lot of religious groups, as you mentioned, Mormons. However, at the same time, we do have to recognize that despite the group nature of such religious groups, we can't always give them that flexibility that's guaranteed to them through something like the free exercise clause in the First Amendment, for example, in Employment Division v. Smith. We've seen that even that certain religious practices, if they violate federal law, that doesn't guarantee religious groups separate rights from just individual rights.
Very good, thank you.
Folks, my question for you today is, for the founders, one of the ends of a federal republic is avoiding the most common faction, that between the rich and the poor. How effective has the U.S. Constitution been in this regard?
I think when it comes to looking at our documents, we can see that there are times when we try to establish this unified front, which can be seen in the Declaration and in the Constitution. Their ideal was to create this unified front regardless of any other unnecessary things such as gender and status. So we can see that at the beginning of the Constitution, this was not met because at the time of the founding, they were more focused on the white male, and that's how it was portrayed to the public, that those who were white and male had priority. So at that time, we can see that it's very different from what we see today. From now, we see more diversity, and I don't think they anticipated that level of diversity in terms of race or anything. They thought more of status in terms of money or in terms of land. So I think that the definition of diversity has changed vastly.
Additionally, we can see the Constitution has adjusted a lot in terms of wealth compared to the Articles of Confederation's time. For example, during the Shays Rebellion, during the Articles of Confederation era, which was a moment of turbulence that actually did bring about good change, as it convinced many people that there must be a way to bridge the gap between rich and poor and make amends for that in the Constitution. And therefore, I think that through revolutions or rebellions like Shays Rebellion, the founders really took the backlash that came through that to create a more stable environment through the Constitution.
I disagree to a certain extent with Annie. I do and agree with Kiera. I do believe that the founders were largely attempting to protect what they saw as the minority of rich landowners, and I think that this can be seen through a lot of the elite institutions that they wrote into the Constitution. For example, the Senate, which was established in Article 1, Section 1, was created to act as a sort of cooling chamber, as I believe was stated in the 72nd Federalist Essay. And basically, the Senate would be a group of these elites who would be able to protect against the passions of the common people who were not as educated, at least in the founders' belief, to know what would be best for the nation.
Let's talk a little bit about Aristotle for a moment. You live in a state that has really adopted and I mean by that initiative, referendum, and recall probably are the three best examples of this. How would Aristotle view those reforms? Would he be in favor of them? Would he be skeptical of them? Why or why not?
I believe Aristotle would be in favor of the initiative, referendum, and recall processes because he was a very classical Republican philosopher, which means he was in favor of small homogeneous communities. He believed that citizens should take an active role in playing in the government and detailing what they think should or should not be passed by law.
And of course, having the initiative and referendum system is one of the most direct ways a citizen can become involved within their government, as they are directly voting for laws and reforms that are going to affect them. However, I think if Aristotle were to support such a system, he would also have to, one of the requirements he might have suggested if that system was presented to him would be his very key classical Republican idea that the citizenry should be educated so they know that they're what they're voting for, what they're doing as they're getting involved.
I just had one quick question before we run out of time.
We ran out of time, Tandy.
Darn. I was going to ask. Well, I'll ask it anyway during my time. Very nicely done, very well organized. You put in a lot of information. You supported your arguments with solid evidence. I liked hearing about Unemployment Commission v. Smith and those are important. Those are how the Constitution continues to be interpreted and how we try to muddle through as best we can. The big question, I think, was I would have liked to see defended, I guess. You're equating the good life, if I remember my Greek at all, which I learned before you were born, I think the eudaimonia, is that the same thing as the pursuit of happiness? Or is pursuit of happiness an individual, whereas eudaimonia is communal? I don't know, but I was, since you brought that up, I was hoping you'd explain that for us a bit better, a bit more fully. But an outstanding discussion. I like, again, your use of evidence, and your organization was just outstanding. Thank you.
Thank you.
I thought Jill did a real nice job too. Particularly, I liked how your presentation was quite streamlined and very easy to follow, very clear. And then you brought in a lot of richness of detail in your in the evidence that you brought to bear on the questions that were asked. So I thought that you were able to show the depth of your knowledge through the questions. I also really liked the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist comparison. And I would agree with Tandy that I would have liked a little bit more elaboration on the distinction between this idea of the good life as the one good life, right, versus the pursuit of happiness, which allows for the fact of human diversity from the founder's perspective. But overall, I thought you did a really nice job.
So I agree with everything my two colleagues have said. A couple of additional thoughts. I like the emphasis on natural rights. We sometimes lose sight of that. I particularly liked your reference to the Anti-Federalists. They often get ignored because they were the loser. Losers don't typically write the history, right? The winners write the history, and the Federalists were the winners. And the Anti-Federalists were kind of a mess. They didn't have great leadership, and it was they were divided as to strategy and tactics and had all kinds of problems. But all of that said, we owe the Bill of Rights to the Anti-Federalists. And if you talk about protecting minority rights, and here I'm not speaking so much of racial and ethnic groups as I am political rights, those rights set out, the negative rights set out in the Bill of Rights are really, really important. And you picked up on an important point there. Citing Employment Division versus Smith was pretty interesting. That case is quite controversial, has been controversial since it was decided, and we haven't heard the last word on it, I don't believe. So that shows a real depth of scholarship here. And finally, on my question about Aristotle, you cited the importance to Aristotle of an educated citizenry, which is a really important point, often forgotten. And the only, sort of minor little niggling little thing that I might point at would be, gee, we could have heard some discussion about Aristotle's skepticism about direct democracy, but we're, several levels down, and we're arguing about a 2,500-year-old discussion, and I thought it was really quite good, and it was great to be part of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Round of applause. Yeah.